Resident Evil. Welcome to Raccoon City.
So Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City tells the story of a small town citizen slowly succumbing to a deadly infection while the sinister secrets of the Umbrella Corporation are discovered. Well, it's finally here, people. One of, if not my most anticipated movie of the year, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, is upon us. Now, I'm going to set the stage right off the bat with who I am, where I am as a Resident Evil fan, and what my expectations for this movie was. Because I think that who you are as a fan and what your expectations are is what's completely going to make or break this film for you and completely give context to whether or not you like it or not. Unfortunately, I missed all of the PlayStation 1 games as far as Resident Evil goes. I did not become a fan of the video game franchise until 2005 when I first picked up a little tiny disc that said Resident Evil 4 for the Nintendo GameCube, and from that game forward, I have become a complete fanatic of this franchise. I've played every single one of the mainline games, not so much all the side stories or the light shooters or anything like that, and I will definitively say that Resident Evil is my favorite video game franchise. Not necessarily my favorite game, that one still goes to Metal Gear Solid, but Resident Evil is my favorite franchise in video gaming, and so I'm very passionate about the source material. I'm very passionate about the story, the characters, how well these movies have translated the video games, which up to this point has not been very well. And I have just reviewed all 6 of the Paul W.S. Anderson films in his Resident Evil franchise, and save for 2 of them, I do still enjoy those movies. They are a guilty pleasure for me. I just kind of have to separate them from the video game franchise and just watch them as generic action horror movies, and I think that they're mostly entertaining for that. But as adaptations of the video games, they're absolutely terrible. So my expectations walking into Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City after seeing the first trailer was that I felt this was going to be a love letter to fans. I felt like there was going to be a lot of things on screen, both visual and hopefully character-wise, that is going to be direct adaptations from the video games. There's going to be a ton of Easter eggs, a ton of nods, a ton of teases for things to come in the future, but I did not expect this movie to be awesome. I figured if anything else, it's going to be a good horror film that is made great possibly because of how much respect it pays to my favorite video game franchise. I did not expect this to be the greatest horror film of the year. I did not even expect this to be that much better than the Paul W.S. Anderson movies on just an objective level. But I figured if anything else, I would enjoy this significantly better as a Resident Evil fan, if nothing else. And with all of that being said, my expectations were met. Mostly, for all the reasons I'm about to get into now. Starting off with the positives for Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, the number one thing is that this is by far one of the best representations of a video game in movie form, for better or worse. There is no other video game movie that I have seen that has directly taken shots. They have built sets to recreate the settings of these games. They have taken the characters and casted them very well and made them look like the characters, made them act like the characters. You have story elements here that's right from the game. They did not just take the Resident Evil name and cherry pick a few elements like they did for almost 15 years in the previous franchise, or like pretty much every other video game movie out there, save for maybe Silent Hill and Mortal Kombat. This is a movie that is made to be as much like the video game that it's taken the name from as humanly possible. I mean, there are moments like whenever they first show the entrance to the Raccoon Police Department, when Leon is sitting at the front desk, that is created directly from the game. From the pillars, from the way that the desk is curved and the things that are behind him, to the statue that's up in the distance on the second floor. I mean, these are details that will go over the head of anybody that has not played the games, and it's just a regular old police station. But if you've played the games, you feel like you have the controller in your hand while the movie is playing. That is how well of a job they have done recreating things. The Spencer Mansion, I mean, they did such a good job with the Spencer Mansion, and that was almost more important than the Raccoon Police Department. So many moments that this really does feel like the video games, and as a fanatic of these games, that just warmed my heart from start to finish. And like I've already hinted at, they casted this movie very well. There's some writing regarding a couple of characters that I did not like, and we will get into that. We will definitely get into that. But as far as the casting, as far as getting capable actors, as far as representing these characters as best as possible, whether or not they are directly from the video games or whether they're taking a little bit of a different spin on that character, I think everybody did their job as an actor. There's a couple of standouts. I thought that Stephen Amell was great as Chris Redfield. I think he really delivered a lot of what we want from that character, especially the early version of Chris Redfield. I thought that Donald Logue was awesome as Chief Irons. I mean, that's a character that's kind of a minor character in one of the games, but he's such a standout in this movie, and Donald Logue just tends to do that. He's just a fun actor that can chew the scenery in a really entertaining way, so he was great. And I actually thought that the chick that they got for Jill Valentine was really good too. There was a bunch of controversy regarding her casting because their race change and the hair change, and she's not wearing the little fucking beret and get the little blue skirt or whatever. It doesn't matter. She really does feel like Jill Valentine. She's a badass bitch. She's got crazy marksman skills. She's got a certain relationship with Wesker and a certain relationship with Chris that was an interesting dynamic to see throughout the movie, so I really liked her as well. And of course, Claire Redfield was a big standout here as well. She's kind of like the center of this movie as far as a story arc. She is the one that opens up the movie in a flashback as a kid. She's kind of the driving force, especially for Chris, about kind of bringing up all these suspicions with the Umbrella Corporation. Of course, she is through all of this with right next to Leon in all of the events that happened in the Raccoon Police Department and eventually converging with the STARS members in the third act of the film. So for somebody that mostly is the focus of the film, she does a really good job as well and is a much better representation of that actual character than the Ali Larter version that we got in the last three movies of the previous franchise. And as far as just a horror movie, I thought that there was a lot of really good tense sequences here. I mean, this is not reinventing the wheel by any means. If you've seen one zombie movie, you've pretty much seen them all. They don't do anything overly different here, but the way that they show this town kind of having this slow infection and not just starting right off with everybody's undead was a really cool kind of ratcheting tension thing where you see people as they start to like bleed from their eyes, and then you see them later on in the movie and their hair's falling out, and then eventually they're just full-on undead. There's people that have like almost like the rage virus from 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later in certain aspects. So you get slower zombies, but you also get faster, more ferocious zombies like the Crimson Heads in the Resident Evil remake. And I thought that was a good element to have both aspects of zombies, to where they're scary because there's numbers of them, but there's also some fear there because they actually are ferocious. They're animalistic. And there's one sequence in particular to where Chris Redfield in like a staircase in a hallway is in complete pitch black darkness fighting off 5 or 6 zombies, and the only flashes, the only light that he gets is from the muzzle of his gun as he's firing them. And so it's a really tense sequence that really brings you back to that claustrophobia that you used to get playing those old tank controls in that first game, to where you feel like you're right there with him, like you're just firing blindly, like, get the fuck away from me, bitches. And I thought all of the practical effects in the movie were really good as well. There is some CGI effects, we'll talk about that, but for the most part, with all of these zombie characters, with all of the human characters and the kills and the blood and the gore that we get regarding all of that, it was all practical and it was done really well. I mean, even just the physical effects on like the zombie, for example, that's straight off of the first game where he turns his head. That was the first zombie I ever saw in Resident Evil. Like, the effects on his face is really good. As the deterioration of these townsfolk, as the infection sets in, they look genuinely creepy. They're not just typical zombies to where they're already like fucking decrepit and got pieces hanging off and they look like they're already half skeleton. These are people that just turned, but they still look monstrous. So they did a really good job with that as well. And finally, I thought that they nailed the tone and the approach of this movie to recreate the tone that those first 2 games were meant to have in a really good way. I mean, this kind of coincides with the first positive that I gave you, but giving a movie like this that has its intense horror, but also has its campy elements, also has its fun along the way. These are video games that were made as homage to old school B-movie horror like the Romero films. And you have to have that tone if you're going to represent those games accurately. You can't have a ultra serious horror movie with no levity. You can't have a super action-packed movie like we got for 6 fucking movies in the previous franchise, for better or worse. They give you the tense moments, they give you the monsters, they give you those great sequences that put you on edge, that make you feel claustrophobic, that make you feel like you're in genuine danger, like you're supposed to feel with those games. But at the same time, they're having fun along the way. The characters are still fun. There's still some very over-the-top elements, especially regarding some of the bigger monsters that we get in the 3rd act, and some scenery chewing from a couple of characters, but it all feels welcome because that's the tone, that is the balance of tone that us video game fans have been looking for years now. So once again, just overall, if you're a fanatic of these Resident Evil games, I think more people than not are really going to enjoy what they did here. Now, moving on to the mixed, that's also kind of the problem with this movie. Now, this movie is made 150% for fans. And that is something that's really cool. As a fan, it is so refreshing to finally have a studio that says this movie is absolutely for you. You are the one invited to the party. Oftentimes when you get an adaptation like this, especially with video games, you have 2 different routes you can take. You can appeal 100% to the fans of the games and try to recreate things and try to bring things directly out of the video games that unfortunately is probably going to go over a lot of people's heads that have not played those games, but you will make these people happy. Or you have the more widespread appeal, which is just take the name, take some elements, make your own thing that everybody can pick up and understand that might alienate the fans a little bit. And 99.99999% of the time, this is the approach that studios take. They cherry pick the name, they take a couple of elements, they throw a movie out there that people that have never played the games can watch, can understand, can follow, and nothing goes over their head. But meanwhile, everybody that loves and is so passionate about that property is bitching the whole movie about why the fuck is that character here? He's from the 4th movie, not the 1st one. Why are you doing this? That's not the character. That's not what that's supposed to look like. And it alienates the fans. This is probably the first video game movie that does not give a flying fuck about this side of things and gives all of the love, all of the attention to the fans. And being a fan, it feels so special to finally be the life of the party when it comes to the movie. But unfortunately, it's a shame that we can't have a movie that has both. And I think there's a way to do both, but they did not do it in this film. It's all for the fans. Everybody on this side is going to get an okay at best horror movie, I would assume, that has a lot of things that they don't understand the importance of, a lot of winks, a lot of nods, a lot of visuals that mean nothing to them, and even to a certain point to where these characters, they probably aren't really going to get a whole lot from them, because I feel like most of the understanding and the love and the appreciation that people that like these characters are going to get is because they already have this preconceived context of who these characters are in their head from their video game days, and they just see it come to life here and they fill in all the blanks. To where if I wiped my memory clean and had never played a Resident Evil game, I probably would tell you that most of the characters in this movie fall flat and don't get a whole lot of development. So while I love that this movie is made for me and it made me so happy, it does kind of bring a little bit of shame to it that I know a lot of people are going to watch this and not appreciate it on the level that I can, and I'm not going to really be able to argue that or defend it because it's just 2 different perspectives. And the CGI is my other mixed element. Now, I will not argue with anybody that looks at this movie and says that some of the CGI here is absolutely god-awful, because it's certainly not up to snuff with what CGI can do nowadays. But for me, as somebody that usually despises CGI in a horror film, because this movie's going for that video game feel and that video game aesthetic and atmosphere, some of the CGI here really didn't make much of a difference to me. Like, I thought the Lickers looked pretty good. I thought that the Cerberus dog looked okay. I think they looked better in the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, but the gigantic monster that you see for a snippet in the trailers, that was the worst CGI in the movie, but even that sequence, I was okay with it. Something about the tone of this movie, that B-movie feel, made that CGI acceptable to me. So it depends on who you are. If you can kind of get into the vibe of the movie and be okay with that, you'll be fine with it, but some people are going to look at that and say, that CGI was fucking trash. And you're not wrong. And now moving on to the negatives. And the big major issue that I have with this movie was the big worry, the big red flag that I walked in with this thing, although I was optimistic as all hell and I was hoping it was going to come together better than I was thinking it was going to. The fact that they decided to do both stories in one movie was a gigantic mistake. There was so much that was skipped over, glossed over, or outright ignored that is very integral to the story of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 that is a shame that even though they're on the right track, we're never going to see that because it just makes no sense to even try to put that into a different storyline. You've already gone through Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 now. And I'm not going to get specific about what they omit just in case you want to go in spoiler free, but there's just major pieces, major villains, major story beats to those first two games that are just gone. And it also feels like those two storylines are battling each other for screen time the entire movie. I mean, there's segments where, like in the trailer, where the helicopter crashes into the Spencer mansion to where it crashes, everybody jumps out of the way, and then the movie cuts to what's going on over at the Raccoon Police Department for about 5 minutes before it cuts back and shows everybody like getting up like, oh, fuck, what the hell happened? And it's such a jarring story element to where you're so invested in what's going on with whatever you're looking at that when it jumps back to the other group, it just kind of like, it takes the wind out of your sails and kind of takes the momentum and the pacing out of either of those storylines. And when you're a really big, passionate fan for both of those storylines, both of those settings, both of those plots, the whole movie you're getting pissed because you feel like you're, okay, all right, we're at the Spencer Mansion, I love this stuff, oh fuck, all right, I love this stuff too, I love the Raccoon Police Department, fuck, pick one. And because this movie's only an hour and 45 minutes long, there's so many things that is just kind of conveniently left out. There's so many logic issues in these two stories that are presented by the way that they're showing this storyline. Like you have shootouts in one part of the mansion where one person is just getting bombarded with zombies and nobody comes to help, as if they can't hear the fucking war zone going on just down the hall, because they don't have the time to explain that. And they don't have the time to have any kind of an address of why that person couldn't come to help. I mean, even the fucking helicopter crashes right into the mansion. Everybody that is in that mansion is going to hear that and immediately go see what the fuck that is, but only the two characters that are right there to see it have anything to do with that whole sequence. And again, it's because we have so much to get over with in the Raccoon City Police Department side of storyline that we don't have time to have any kind of logic with what's going on in the Spencer Mansion. Just take what you get. And you have some of those issues in the Raccoon Police Department too, where things are just brought up, resolved, and we got to get back over here because what's going on with the STARS members. And it also leaves me very concerned because when they decided to mash those two storylines together, I don't know where they're going to go from here. Like, if this movie does succeed, and I hope it does, and we do get a follow-up, what are you going to adapt now? Because you've taken the STARS members and you've put them in the same setting, in the same scenario as Leon and Claire, to where you guys end up in the same climax together at the end of this film. So now you can't do anything with Resident Evil Nemesis because Jill is with them and Raccoon City is destroyed by the end of this. And it's like, what now? We're not just going to go to Resident Evil 4 because that would make no sense in narrative form to go from one movie to that. That's a huge leap. What now, guys? Just for the life of me, I don't understand why they took that approach. I mean, if they had such confidence in their product and if they had such passion that they clearly did for the video game franchise, why would they not just do a movie based off the first game and let that be its own story and then follow it up, if it's a success, with the story of Resident Evil 2, just like the games did? I don't get it. Why do both at once? There was no reason for that. It's hard enough to adapt one video game. I mean, you're talking about 6, 8, 12, sometimes 100 hours worth of gameplay that you're trying to cram into 2 hours, and you're trying to do 2 of those in 2 hours? Less than 2 hours in this movie's case? Why handicap yourself like that? I saw the trailer. I thought that there was a possibility that they could work those stories together in a cool way. They could bring enough to where it felt natural and they got a lot of things covered in the runtime before I realized it was only an hour and 45 minutes long. But leaving the movie, that really was the biggest detriment to the storytelling and the biggest detriment to the potential of this new franchise, is that you just crammed all of that into one movie, and now where the fuck do you go? Beyond that, there were two characters, actually three characters, that I did not like what they did at all with them. The main one is Leon. Now, I was somebody that was defending the casting of this guy as Leon, and I will still hold true that the casting is not the problem. I think he's fine in the role, for the type of role that they gave him, for the version of Leon that they gave him. He does very well for that. He looks enough like Leon to where it was not distracting to me. I think everybody's been blowing that way out of proportion. But the version of Leon that you get in this movie is a fucking moron. You have the whole storyline of Leon Kennedy. For those that have not played the video games, he is a rookie cop. He is joining the Raccoon Police Department. He is joining the force. This is his first day on the job when everything pops off in Raccoon City. And the heroism of this character is that he has no experience. He has no time on the force. He has no life experience whatsoever with violence or shooting or any kind of action, but he rises to the occasion as this rookie and becomes the hero of the story along with Claire, and vanquishes the evil in Raccoon City. And then later becomes probably arguably the biggest character in the Resident Evil franchise. If not, it's Chris Redfield, but he's damn close. But the version of the character that you get in this movie is that he is a rookie cop. This is his first day on the force because he's a fucking jackass. He can't hold a job. His father's embarrassed of him. He accidentally shot his partner in the ass during training. Like, he's a fucking doofus. He's there for like light comedic relief. He's a butt of every single idiotic joke that they have in the movie. And that is such a stupid ass thing to do with a character that is beloved like Leon. Like I've already said, arguably, for a lot of people, the biggest and best character in the franchise. I certainly belong in that camp. And when you take a beloved character like that and you just shit all over him with your version, wow. For love letters to the fans, that was kind of a little middle finger you slipped in there. I don't know if the guy that wrote and directed this movie just doesn't like the character of Leon, and that was kind of like his troll way of letting the fans know that he hates that character, or if he genuinely just hasn't played the games but did a pretty damn good job at putting everything together through bullet point notes or something, and all he had for Leon was rookie cop, and he just took it in a weird direction. But I fucking hated the version of Leon that we got in this movie. That was so disrespectful to me of the legacy of that character. Then you have Albert Wesker. Now, Albert Wesker was not nearly as egregious as Leon, but that was not Wesker. This was like a frat boy character. He was kind of like the jokey one of the group, and he's playing pranks and all of that goofy stuff. You could tell that he was a fun character. He was intended to be, and I did enjoy him in the movie. For like, if he was just not named Wesker, I would have been like, oh, his character was kind of fun. But when you say the name Albert Wesker, you put an expectation in the heads of everybody that knows that character, especially when you're telling the story of the Spencer Mansion, and that was not it. That was not it at all. They could argue and say that this is like an early version of Wesker, and if they do 2 or 3 movies, eventually he becomes the Wesker that we know and love. But the problem is, if you're telling the story of the first game, there's no reason not to already have the version of Albert Wesker that we know and love. So that was also a giant miss for me. And the third one, and possibly the most disappointing, even though it was the least offensive, was Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor is a villain that is in the remake version of the original Resident Evil. She was not in the 96 version. And we've seen her in the trailers. She is a kid that was experimented on by Umbrella that wears the skin and the faces all around her head to like cover up her disfigurement, and she's shackled up and she's got superhuman strength, and she walks around in the video game, she's like, "Mother!" and she's trying to find her mother's corpse the entire game. She's fucking terrifying. She is like one of the most bone-chilling villains you will ever encounter in the entire video game franchise. And when they showed clips and showed still images of her, everybody that has played that remake was like, oh, Lisa Trevor, oh my God, she's gonna be in the movies. And it was so exciting. The version that we get here feels like she was thrown in just to be thrown in. They don't really get the character right. I don't even understand the logic of how they use the character. This is not a spoiler, but there is a sequence involving kids in an orphanage to to where Lisa Trevor keeps popping up and there's a little girl that keeps saying like there's a woman here, and they keep seeing it, and it's like building this sense of tension that there's this threat somewhere in the orphanage. But there's still doctors and people working for Umbrella walking in and out of the rooms all the time. So how the hell is this gigantic deformity just walking around, nobody's noticing her the entire time? That was another logic issue where I was like, huh? But they take a direction with her character that it made sense for the movie and the way that they introduced her character as kind of like a bookend to her story, but they didn't nail what we came to see Lisa Trevor for. Anybody that came to this movie with an idea of what Lisa Trevor was, that was not the utilization of that character that we came for at all. And finally, the third act of this movie felt like it was about 8 minutes long. Like it was like 2 acts of movie that took 90% of the runtime, and then as soon as they get into the third act stuff, it's introduced, it's resolved, credits roll. And it was so jarring for me to where when it popped up and said Resident Evil, I was like, that's it? We just fucking got started. Like, oh, movie. And I don't know if there's a director's cut or if there's an extended cut or if they were scared. Like, it felt like something was trimmed out, and I don't know exactly what or where, but the first 2 acts were so deliberately paced, and they needed to be because there was 2 fucking movies of storyline going on to where they're introducing the characters, and they're introducing the motivations, and they're introducing the 2 different threats and the 2 different settings, and they're jumping between both of those and, you know, building up some potential threats for the third act. And then as soon as the third act hits, everything is just so fast and so rushed that you really don't get any sort of conclusion or any sort of sense of finality with what's going on. It just kind of feels like, all right, guys, see you next time. And I hope we get a next time, but if not, what the fuck, man? So overall, guys, this movie is going to be very easy to review, but it's going to be very difficult for me to rank it, and I will be ranking it on Saturday. I'm also doing a spoiler chat about this movie on Friday with a couple of guests, so stay tuned for that. But this is a movie that I will say definitively is a much better representation of Resident Evil than the other 6 films. But as somebody that's a fan of a couple of those movies, I don't know if I can say if it's a better movie than some of those movies. I'm gonna have to sleep on it a little bit and think about that. Overall, big love letter to the fans. If you're a Resident Evil fanatic, if you love the video games, there's a lot here that you are absolutely going to love. But if you're just a movie fan walking in to watch a horror film, I really don't know if you're going to get much out of this that you haven't already gotten from other better movies. It's a shame. It's a movie that I think has a lot going for it, but also has some very, very integral issues that I want to see a follow-up. I want to see them work through all of that, but time's going to tell if this thing succeeds or not. So, met my expectations, but my expectations were very realistic that this was not going to be a great movie. It was just going to be an entertaining time for a Resident Evil fan, and it was. So your average moviegoer or very casual fans of the franchise can either skip this outright or wait to check it out online. But if you are a fanatic, there is just enough to love here that I'll recommend that you go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City? Are you a fan of the video games? Have you never played a single one of them? And what did you think of this? Did you love it or did you hate it? Let me know the answer to both of those questions down below and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss that spoiler talk or that ranking this weekend. And I also have a lot of backlog Resident Evil content. Like I said, I just reviewed all 6 of the Paul W.S. Anderson franchise movies, as well as I reviewed Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8. I've done a couple of video game rankings just on the franchise that way. So if you're a Resident Evil fan, definitely hit the subscribe button. We got even more coming your way. Thank you guys for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.